Hello and welcome to Autocar Professional. Government has proposed a draft policy for E85 fuel. And to talk more about it, I have with me the man himself who can tell us a lot more about ethanol, and that's Mr. Deepak Ballani, Director General, ISMA. Thank you so much for joining us today. My first question to you is this E85 fuel. Uh, how significant it is, and how the draft policy that you have seen, um, what is your assessment of that policy?
Thank you, Mugdha, for having me on your show. See, ethanol is not only important for us, it is also important for the entire country. We have seen what has happened because of the West Asia crisis. And as Honorable Prime Minister recently said in the Parliament, that because of the ethanol E20 which we have achieved, we have imported 4.5 crore less barrel from other countries. So it has really helped our country and specifically the farmers in our country. Having said that, see, the government started the program way back in 2014, but the real energy came after 2018, after the government of India issued an ethanol blending program roadmap stating that India will achieve E20 by 2025. And as very rightly said, in 2025, India achieved E20, that means 20% ethanol blending in the gasoline. And that is where the entire story starts, because of the roadmap and also a very good policy by the government, the industry put up the capacity. For example, today, the sugar industry itself has put up a capacity of producing almost 900 crore litre of ethanol. And if you also add grain ethanol, we have a production capacity of almost 2000 crore litre. But having said that, see, E20, our consumption is only around 1100 crore litre. So that's again a big problem, because today we are basically facing a overcapacity and underutilization of our assets of production capacity, and that is really hurting the industry. So we had requested the government to come up with a roadmap of what should be beyond E20, because as I said, it doesn't really help the industry or farmer. It also helps our country as far as the energy security is concerned. So I'm very happy that government has finally notified the policy enablement, basically saying that the trial and testing can start on E85 and also E100 fuel. E85 basically is 85% ethanol. E100 is 100% ethanol. In Brazil, for example, we have E100, which is 100% pure ethanol.
Yeah.
And today Brazil has shown that this can be done. Today in Brazil, the total average ethanol consumption is above 50%. So that's a great achievement, and we are hoping that with very good policies like E85 or E100, which government is thinking of, India will also achieve a higher level of blending and less dependence on the import of crude from other countries.
Uh, you know, um, that Brazil model gets quoted a lot every time we speak about ethanol blending, and it's a very successful model for ethanol blending. But don't you think their reality is a little different than our reality because of the population? Why am I saying that? That Brazil was an excess producer of sugarcane, excess producer of sugar, and the number of people there is lot less. The population is lot less, so they don't have food security issues. Now in India, yes, of course, sugarcane production is on the highest side, and we do produce excess sugar, and government at one point had to manage both on the sugarcane side and sugar price, which changed later. But there are concerns of food security when the ethanol blending really starts taking place. Do you think we are in a situation, we are in a position where we can effectively use E85 or E100 fuel also without compromising on food requirement of the country?
Very good question. See, basically, we must understand what are the priorities of the government. The first priority of government is to cater to the consumption of our country. For example, consider sugar. Now, for last 10 years, we have been consistently producing more sugar than what we can consume. So the first priority is our domestic consumption. Only after the domestic consumption, if there is surplus sugar left, is diverted to ethanol. And let me go further one step. After diversification in ethanol, if there is something left, we also export sugar. So this is the priority which has been very well laid by the government. So there is absolutely no question of food versus fuel debate. It is about food and fuel. Also, other crops, if you see rice, for example, or maize, for example, both the crops we have surplus in the country. So ethanol is only produced from the surplus sugar and surplus grain. There is absolutely nothing to worry about anything to do with the food security, and it is very clearly mandated. That is number one. So this is about 1G ethanol, first generation ethanol. So that means today if we have 2000 crore liter of ethanol capacity, that is already catering to the surplus grains which we have. So that means there is no wastage of the grain. Ultimately what we are doing, we are using the surplus grain to make ethanol. Otherwise, this either could have been exported or wasted. Today, we have so much of rice in the country. FCI doesn't have the godowns to keep the rice. So the best way is to utilize this and make ethanol so that we are more energy independent. So first of all, let us keep this very, very clear. There is absolutely no worry on the food security as far as ethanol is concerned. Considering that we have 2000 crore liter of capacity, we can easily cater to the average blending of almost 35%. But going ahead, for example, E85 is not going to happen overnight. Considering that the government comes up with the policy that E85 has to be done, the flex fuel will come. Flex fuel, as you know, is a vehicle which is bit modified ICE engine, which can take any blend of ethanol from E0 to E100. But this transformation will not happen overnight. Considering that there would be around 10 to 20% of penetration initially, we are looking at not a huge requirement of ethanol by 2030. It could be 300, 400 crore liter additional, for which we already have the capacity. But assuming this goes beyond 2030 and we require more ethanol, then the second generation ethanol technology has now matured, which actually uses the agro waste, the residues, for making ethanol. So considering that if we have to go beyond our existing capacity, we also have the second generation ethanol which will come into investment. A lot of industries would be ready to invest by then. But what is important is the policy by the government and a roadmap to go beyond E20, considering maybe E85, E100, or a calibrated increase in the blending itself, maybe E22, 25, 27.
So you are still sticking to your request to increase ethanol blending in regular fuel as well?
See, there are, although we are more focused on E85 or E100 because we feel that is the real structural change we require as far as the ecosystem is concerned. Because flex can take any blend of vehicle, so there would be absolutely no talk about whether the engine is ready or not ready. Having said that, the immediate capacity utilization will only come from increasing the blend from maybe from 20 to 22, which perhaps will immediately increase my capacity utilization by almost 150 crore. And today the biggest problem we are facing is of the overcapacity and unutilization of our production capacity. So I believe that the engines today, which are basically E20 compliant, are tolerant enough to take E22 without any problems, and that perhaps if could be done, I think it would be good for the entire ecosystem, including the farmers.
The biggest uh, challenge in this is that the customer, the consumer at the end has to, first of all, now with crude prices going so high, it gets very difficult for government to take out more money to subsidize it. Then they suffer on mileage, and they also suffer with more regular servicing, and if they have older vehicle, then they have to manage all the wear and tear that might happen because of ethanol. So it's the consumer who's suffering.
Let me first set the record right. That as far as E20 is concerned, there has been absolutely no factual information or any complaint, a genuine complaint on any damage to the vehicle because of E20. It's very clear. There was a misinformation campaign by vested interest last year, which tried to bring bad light to ethanol. I believe this was completely misinformed, and
But
I
mileage
believe
does, there is proof that
yes.
mileage
So I'm just
does,
coming. I'm coming to
yeah.
that. I'm coming to that. See, because the calorific value of ethanol is lesser than the petrol, there is a bit reduction in the mileage. But considering that 20% is the only blend out of the entire 100%, and overall it is around 20% less. So if you take about only 20% ethanol, it is hardly coming to 4 to 5% of mileage reduction. But see the larger picture. What is happening today? See, so much of problem we are facing because of the West Asia crisis. Do you really want to depend on the imported crude? Today, government has been very proactive in managing. But considering that this war goes on for next 6 months or 8 months, and if there are disruptions for next 1 year, where will the prices go? How will government manage? Anything could happen. So do you still want to depend on the imported crude, or you still want to have your own resources, depend on our resources, and a very little bit of compromise? The reduction also happens because of various other reasons. The vehicle is not maintained properly, or it is not driven properly. There are many reasons for that. So it's not proper or fair to put the blame on ethanol alone. Ethanol, I believe, and I believe on 1st of April, from 1st of April of this year, government has also mandated that every E20 petrol will be around 95. That means octane number has to be maintained at 95, which enhances the quality of the fuel and also compensates the energy loss and makes it better energy efficient fuel. So I believe we are on the right track. But if you talk about E85, now since E85 will have 85% ethanol, there would be a substantial drop in the mileage. I believe that is where the government has to now look at differential pricing between E20, which perhaps could be the base blend, and E85 fuel. So there has to be a difference in the pricing because the customer needs to be compensated for the loss in efficiency if they're going for E85 and E100, because that is how the entire ecosystem will start working. For example, even Brazil, there is a price difference between E100 and E27, which is their base blend. So I believe government is already looking at some GST rationalization as far as E85 is concerned, and maybe if everything goes right, we will have lesser pricing for E85. So the cost of ownership and the cost of running the vehicle will be lesser, and there will be takers of the E85 fuel.
Last time you spoke to Autocar, you said that the cost of production of ethanol uh, is probably high in India, and that was one of the reasons why you cited that we can't export. But that was also one of the reasons why you said that subsidizing it is also a little difficult, except for in taxes. So, how is the situation? Why is it different for E85?
As far as the cost of ethanol is concerned, see, cost of ethanol, what is my feedstock? For example, if I talk about sugarcane, which primarily I represent, the feedstock is sugarcane. The sugarcane feedstock, the cost of feedstock itself is around 75% of the cost of ethanol. The rest is the conversion cost. And who decides the cost of the feedstock? It is not an open market thing. The government decides how much I am supposed to pay to the farmer for every quintal of sugarcane. So it is a completely regulated feedstock sector. And every year, the government is revising the FRP of sugarcane. Only yesterday, the cabinet has passed that the FRP of sugarcane will be increased from 355 rupees per quintal to 365 rupees per quintal from the next season, which is from 1st of October. That means my cost of raw material is going up, and if that is 75% of cost of ethanol, then how do I manage? I have to pass it on to somebody. So it has to be passed it on to OMCs. But having said that, what is my cost of petrol today? Today we are at $100 per barrel.
Yeah.
We also reached at 120. So that means my cost of petrol is much higher today than your cost of ethanol. But if you, so compensating me for the cost of production, it doesn't really matter, because ultimately who is benefiting? Country is benefiting, the farmer is benefiting. Since the ethanol blending program was started, there has been an additional payment of 1.5 lakh crore to the farmers. Imagine what it has done to the rural prosperity. And in cities, we are sitting and overlooking these very, very big aspects. It has given boost to our economy. It has given boost to our rural income, which is very, very important for a country. So let's see the larger picture. So asking for a increase in cost is perhaps based on what is my cost of feedstock. And today, I believe we are much cheaper than what you are importing as far as the crude is concerned.
Yeah. We read some time back that one argument against ethanol is that it uses exorbitant amount of water. What is the situation there? How much water does ethanol actually need for per liter of ethanol?
I've also read this thing, and I believe it was completely out of context and not really showing the clear picture. See, what was quoted one was 10,000 liter of a complete water footprint for rice ethanol. So that means water used during the entire process, including the irrigation water, the rainfall, using the entire agriculture, and also distillery. For example, if you take sugarcane itself, because primarily I represent sugarcane. So last year there was an expert committee which was also set up by government, and ISMA also with ICAR did a study on what is the water footprint for sugarcane. And there is a factual report and factual data that sugarcane, the entire water footprint is around 2000 liters per liter of ethanol. It is perhaps the most water productive crop as far as per liter of ethanol is concerned. Having said that, this is the entire water footprint. But if you only talk about the distillery, once the sugarcane arrives at the distillery, it is only using around 3.5 liters of water per liter of ethanol. So, see, we are not quoting things in the right context. If you take the entire water footprint, that means you're taking the waterfall also, you're taking irrigation also. Even a cup of coffee in a lighter note, even a cup of coffee which you drink is a water crisis.
True.
Because if you calculate, there will be huge water footprint as far as one cup of coffee is concerned. So let us set the context properly. It is not alarming, and plus we are also government is also making effort in seeing that a lot of, for example, micro irrigation facilities are being set up in various regions so that we even use less water. For example, government has various schemes to help farmers subsidize installation of drip irrigation facilities. That is also now being implemented in various regions for various crops. So this entire water footprint is also coming down slowly. But we must look at the larger picture and factual data, not try to create sensation by quoting figure and just saying that it takes 10,000 liter. It's not correct.
Okay. My next question is, you said that there's excess capacity right now. If E85 gets implemented, do you think that will balance out this excess capacity? And if there is a large scale rollout across the country, do you think you will need to set up more capacity? Where does the balance lie?
It completely depends on what government wants. Now there are two scenarios. For example, government comes with a mandate or policy of E85, for example. Now, one is that they will have to create an infrastructure for dispensing of E85. Now, it depends how soon they can create the dispensing infrastructure. On the same hand, the OEMs will have to come out with the vehicles which can take higher blend, the flex fuel vehicles. I believe that many OEMs are ready with launching of their flex fuel, considering or subject to the decision by the government, because ultimately policy is required. Now, if, for example, assuming that E85 fuel, there is a policy by the government, and there are some regions where the government is prioritizing that we will have the flex fuel in those regions. So if we don't, so one is that if we, for example, mandate that every ICE vehicle from 2027 will be flex fuel vehicle, and that is what it is in Brazil, because flex is a slightly modified version of ICE engine, which can take any blend, as I just said. So if every vehicle from next year, 2027, is a flex engine, and we have A85 dispensing infrastructure, and considering that we will have around 8 to 10 OEMs or at least vehicles launched next year, by 2030 we are hoping that there will be an additional capacity utilization of almost 500 to 600 crore liter, for which we already have the capacity. So we don't have to create new capacities to create infrastructure for catering to.
No new
Yes.
investments required
Yes.
at least till 2030.
But the second scenario is that
Except for a rollout.
Yeah. So second scenario is that if government doesn't really mandate and says that it is completely market driven and it is not, I mean, both ICE engines and flex engines would be sold in the market. So depends on what is the cost of the vehicle, because the cost of the ownership has to be almost at the same level of ICE engine. For that, GST rationalization needs to be done as far as the vehicle is concerned. It also depends on the cost of E85 fuel. So considering that we will have on an average 10 to 15, 20% of penetration every year out of all the new vehicles sold, we are only looking at around 100, 150 crore liter of additional ethanol to be used by 2030, which we already have the capacity. So definitely a very good structural change, but I believe we will have to do more to utilize the overcapacities.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Ballani, for taking time out and explaining all these matters
Thank you,
in
Mugdha.
detail.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.